Hey everybody, Dr. Dave Marquis here, and I have had so many questions about nebulized hydrogen peroxide that I thought it would be appropriate to take some more time and just do a video, because I'm a practicing doctor and I get volumes of questions every single day, and to answer each one in the detail that they're asked, I just don't have that capacity. So I hope that I'm able to address as many of your questions in this video relative to hydrogen peroxide and its uses as I can. Please continue to issue the questions. I really appreciate you watching the videos. I appreciate you taking ownership for your own health and applying that information. And I love to hear about each of your wins and how your health improves by implementing the various things that I've made recommendations on. That's really rewarding to me. Having said that, what I have in front of me here, I've just got my laptop and I'm only using it as a power source, because nebulizers generally work better if they're plugged into a wall. So there's a lot of different types of nebulizers, and they all have pros and cons. So I'm not going to endorse any one type per se. I like to have something portable personally. So this is an inexpensive, I think it was like $35-ish nebulizer that also runs on batteries. But I personally have found that when I plug it in, it seems to work better, unless those batteries are really fresh. So you'll find online a lot of different resources for nebulizers. Realize that they're all going to break at some point in time, and if you take good care of them, they're going to last a little bit longer. Basic aspects to them that are handy is if they're able to come apart so that the portion that contains the liquid doesn't perpetually leak onto the leads. So there's a little electrostatic probes that come out here that connect to the electronics on the inside, and that's ultimately what makes the membrane on the back of this thing turn liquid into micronized vapor. So after the use of this, you want to always pour the liquid out and let the thing air dry, and let these pieces air dry separately so that there's no chance for corrosion. Corrosion really is the #1 killer to nebulizers, and sometimes people will do their treatment and they'll leave a little bit of liquid still in there, and they'll set the thing down and they'll go about their business, and they'll come back a week later and they'll find out that all the contacts are corroded and the thing's not working that well. Well, that's because you didn't take care of it. So they do last as long as you take care of them, and they're really not that expensive. So those are the 2 bullet points. If you get a portable one, make sure that it does have the option to plug into the wall. It's really not an additional feature in terms of cost. It just should be there. That way you've got 2 different modes of application. But these handheld things are great for travel. I always travel with one because we're acquiring so much stuff in our airways just through the day of being in an airplane or a bus or a car or a train. And you want to clear your airways out. And this is a great way to do that. So having said that, hydrogen peroxide has been safely used for over 100 years. And there's one major question that I commonly get is, well, does it have to be food grade? Well, ideally it is, because it's going to be a purified form. Some of the over-the-counter 3%ers that you'll find have stabilizers in them, and you really don't want to be breathing a lot of stabilizers. That's not ideal. But some of them don't. And in a pinch, I'll just tell you what I do. I've used the over-the-counter hydrogen peroxide for probably 10-15 years very safely. And it's gotten me out of moments when I knew that I was acquiring an infection and things weren't going well, and it turned things around for me in a day. So I know that it works, I know that that's safe, but I'm not saying go do that. We don't always know when we're going to get sick. And so if you haven't prepared in advance and you're starting to go down, what I'm saying is that it's more important that you clear your airways in a timely fashion than to have all of your ducks in a row and everything's perfect. Sometimes we just got to do the best thing that we can. And so when I'm traveling, I really don't always have access to food-grade hydrogen peroxide, so going into a drugstore and getting the next best thing, that's been my go-to, and it has worked. It is best to use distilled water, and that's pretty readily available, and if not, you can actually make your own, just boiling it on the stove and getting rid of the minerals and killing off anything in that. So you can make pure water, or you can go buy pure water, but those would be the two things that I would recommend as a standard. Make sure that you've got as clean a water as possible, and make sure that you've got the best hydrogen peroxide as possible. You're trying to get it down to a 3% concentration of hydrogen peroxide, and then you're going to take that, and I generally will start people at a 4-to-1 concentrate inside the nebulizer. So you'll put 4 parts of water to 1 part of hydrogen peroxide. Depending on how irritated your airways are, you might find a need to use a buffer in that solution. And some of the doctors that you've probably seen videos on will use saline water for that purpose. Because if you have saline, it also allows for the irritation of the airways to be reduced. And so that's another form of water that you can use. So you can use distilled saline water, but in a pinch, you just need water. Every individual is going to approach this in a different way relative to their state of health in that moment. And if your airways are really inflamed and constricted, then yeah, using something that's a buffered water with a low concentration of hydrogen peroxide is going to be the least irritating in that moment. And you're going to want to do it fairly frequently that first day, maybe once an hour. But then as the airways start to clear, you can start to spread that out and go to once every 4 hours, once every 6 hours. Generally, I usually only need to do this once a day if I'm doing it in a preventative measure while I'm traveling. Or if I start to feel a little congested or a tickle in my throat, like, oh, you know what, I might be coming down with something. I'll do that once. I'm golden. It'll work well for me. But there have been times where I either didn't have my unit with me, or we get lazy, and I put it off for a day, and I'll wake up the next day and go, dang it, I really should have done that yesterday. And then it's like playing catch up, and I'll have to put a little more time and energy behind catching up to this infection that has already started to get seeded. But this and some of the other things that I've shared with you in terms of antiviral protocols, combining all of that works beautifully to get ahead of infections. So I'm going to demonstrate again. I've already prepared this with 4 parts water to 1 part of the 3% hydrogen peroxide, and it's plugged in to the computer right now just as its energy source. That's the only reason that's there. And then as I turn that on, you'll see the micronized vapor start to come out. Pretty simple. Now there's different adapters that people can put onto this. So you could take off that mouthpiece, and you could put on a mask and use it that way, where you're actually able to inhale through the nose and the mouth simultaneously. I generally will just use the mouthpiece, and I like to draw it in through my sinuses the first couple of times, and I'll hold it as deeply as I can in the lungs, and then I'll exhale, and I'll start to draw some in through the mouth and let that settle into the lungs and exhale. I'll usually spend between 2 on the short side to 5 on the long side minutes of breathing this. I'm not necessarily going through the whole container. I usually do it by time and also kind of how I feel. It's interesting that when your airways are congested and you're utilizing something that gives you the opportunity to clear inflammation, you know when it's opening. I mean, you can feel a difference there. And so that's one of the things that I personally go for. I try to get that feel like, oh yeah, I can breathe deeper now. One more point that I'll share, and this is just a personal one. Years ago, when I lived in Asia, I had a really bad case of walking pneumonia, and it lasted for a couple of months. And I ended up on a continual series of antibiotics. It really messed me up, and that was back in my 20s. It's actually a lot of the reason why I do what I do today, because I had to clean up the mess from overuse of all those antibiotics and allowing myself to get sick. But I actually ended up with some scarring in my lungs where I was having a hard time with any infection. And if I got an upper respiratory infection, bam, it would settle right there, bronchitis guaranteed. And that was all the way up into my 30s, where it was just kind of this perpetual hamster wheel of dealing with these upper respiratory things. And I was always seeking out different ways to find out how I could break that cycle and get ahead of it. Well, I won't go into that detail of all the nuances of what I discovered about myself, but I found that when I started utilizing nebulized hydrogen peroxide, it was like this big aha moment, the first time I really felt like I could breathe deeply again, like it turned the clock back. And so this has been a go-to for me just to help keep some of the old damage that I incurred back in my 20s from becoming exacerbated by the day-to-day stuff that we deal with colds and flus and viruses and bacteria. So I'll show you again. Here we go. I'm just going to breathe in with my nose. And then I'll do the same thing orally. Kind of like watching paint dry, right? It works. This is a great tool. I hope that this video has been informational and kind of walks you through the paces and maybe takes some of the mystery out of using a nebulizer. It really is pretty linear. The only difficulty comes when you're trying to change your ratios. So when you're getting food grade, you do have to do your own titration and make sure that you're getting it down to a 3% concentration. So that would be the one caveat that I'd say if you're not buying it in a 3% form. I hope that was helpful. Please be healthy. Do everything that you can to own your own health and understand the pros and cons of every decision that you make relative to things that are going to impact your wellness in the long term. Be well.